All right, Dr. Jennifer Roback-Morse, founder of the Ruth Institute, author of Love and Economics and the Sexual State. Welcome to Reasonably Rational. Thanks for joining me.
Well, Steve, thanks for having me. I'm honored that you invited me to be part of your new podcast, and I wish you all great success with it.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm very pleased that someone of your stature is willing to come on the baby program and help us kind of get this thing rolling. Since it's your first time on the podcast, I thought maybe we could just kind of begin with your story. Spoiler alert for viewers, we're going to be kind of talking about and taking apart the sexual revolution and its many different facets and what it's morphed into, et cetera. But I'd love for you to just kind of share sort of your personal history with it, because you have a connection to it, and then of course that's become kind of what your mission and ministry has been about as well.
Right, right. Well, I want to just say before we do that, though, that you and I became acquainted when you and your wife were doing a podcast or the equivalent of a podcast
Yep.
for the Diocese of Phoenix. And I want to express my admiration for your former bishop, Thomas Olmsted, because he was a big booster of mine. He was very good to me. Yeah, I was invited to Phoenix multiple times, in part because of him and the people that he assembled around him, like you and Mike Phelan, and
Yeah.
just a lot of great people from that era. And one of the things that he was very keen on was marriage and man-woman marriage, and he overhauled the marriage prep program out there. And I mean, he didn't want people that got married in his diocese showing up at the tribunal 10 years later saying that they didn't know what they were doing and they should be entitled to an annulment.
That's right.
So I always respected the fact that I have the highest respect for him, especially for his vision, his far seeing, uh,
Amen. Amen.
just
Yeah,
how important these realities really are. So,
that's
but
so true.
but anyway, I mean, you want to hear my story. Shall we go back to birth? I mean, how far back do you want to go, Steve?
Well,
Um,
we can join the narrative at whatever point seems
yeah, right.
to be most helpful.
Well, in a way, all these things are relevant because your position in a family is your identity. And this is one thing that we've really lost sight of as a culture. So I'll just start by saying I was the third of six children. I was born in 1953, so you can do the math about how old I am. And I grew up in a working class Catholic family. And we were pre-Vatican II. I went to Catholic grade school when the Catholic school had zero tuition, literally zero tuition in our little
Mm,
working class community because there were nuns, there were sisters,
that's right.
who were working at very low wages. And, that's the era that I grew up in. And I
Jennifer,
memorized
where are you from originally?
Columbus, Ohio.
Ohio.
I'm, I'm,
Okay.
act-
Okay.
I'm actually a Buckeye, but we don't need to go down that rabbit trail.
As a native of Wisconsin, it's probably best that we quickly move on to more pleasant topics.
Yes, I agree. I agree. um, well, when you grow up a Buckeye, you just think that winning is your birthright. You see, it has a formative
That is most
effect on
definitely not what happens when you grow up a Badger fan. We wish that was our experience.
but I can claim zero credit for it. Okay, so we should just put all of that aside. Yeah. But yeah, I memorized the Baltimore Catechism in fourth grade because
Hmm.
that's what everybody did, and I joke around that was the end of my formal philosophical training, but it's actually enough, because the Baltimore Catechism is and was the Summa Theologica rewritten for children. I mean, that's
Hmm.
what it is. It's just a basic Thomistic philosophy, theology, all just kind of laid out there. And that actually is one of the beautiful things about the Catholic faith is that it's simple enough for a child to understand and yet deep enough that you can meditate on it for your whole life and never get to the bottom of it completely. Um, but anyway, when I was a little girl, it was okay to say that I want to be a mommy when I grow up. By
Hmm.
the time I started college, it was no longer okay to say that. So
Ah,
that kind of frames the generation that I grew up in. And so you could say that if for people of my generation, men and women alike, we looked at the sexual revolution as, wow, this sounds great. This sounds like, wow, let's do this. This sounds so good. because the overall picture that we were being given was, gosh, all of the old rules about sexual behavior, those are all mindless taboos. They don't serve any purpose. We're well rid of them. It is repressive. Now we have the pill. We have birth control. We don't have sex and babies are not connected. We can do what we want. All of this type of that was the vibe. Let's put it that
Hmm.
way. That was the vibe, that we were going to change everything, and there'd be no negative consequences. Everything would be fine. And so what it came down to, of course, we didn't know this at the time because it's never. I don't know that anybody really knew it at the time, but basically we were being told you can do anything you want sexually, nothing bad will happen.
Right.
Nothing bad will happen to you, nothing bad will happen to anybody around you. And that's a very seductive business, right?
Mm.
And the reality is that's still being promoted. Never in exactly those words, right? Because it'd be too obvious that it was crazy, you know. But that is still what's being promoted. That there are no reasonable, universally applicable rules about what you should and shouldn't do sexually. So if you feel like it, that's fine. If you have quirky lifestyle preferences and you want a baby sometime, well, that's okay. Just don't do anything crazy like have three or something, you know. Um, you know, but so that's I guess you would say a global, you know, overview of it. So I went off to college. I went to Oberlin College for 2 years. That was the first school that had co-ed dorms. And I
Mm.
remember one of my father's friends saying to him, then there was a big cover story in Life magazine showing this couple at Oberlin in their co-ed dorm, and it was pretty obvious what they were doing in their co-ed dorm, right? And I remember that one of my father's friends said to my father, "Jimmy, do you know where you're sending your daughter?" And of course he didn't. I didn't. Really, none of us really knew what was ahead. And so yeah, it was in some ways easy to embrace it, but then there were problems appeared almost immediately, but it takes a while to sort it all out.
Hmm.
And what the common thread was about why things weren't working. So I mean, I went off to Oberlin College, took full advantage of the co-ed dorms, dropped out after 2 years, went to Ohio State, finished at Ohio State. Go Buckeyes! Woody Hayes era. Just
Oh, they're the
um,
golden years. Wow.
yeah, yeah. But I married the first man who asked me at age 20. Was divorced by age 24.
Mm.
Had had an abortion. Just did a bunch of things that obviously I now think were really wrong, and that I had an inkling at the time weren't really right. You know,
Hmm.
um, but anyway, fast forward, and then I decided I wanted to do economics, and I got a PhD in economics. Got Ended up getting married a second time. Got a postdoc at the University of Chicago. Taught at Yale University. While I was at Yale, that's when I married my live-in boyfriend, my then live-in boyfriend. Um, and we were very libertarian about it. That was kind of my thing, because that whole you can do anything you want and nothing bad will happen. The invisible hand of the market will solve all the problems of the economy. And I wanted to believe that was true more broadly, which it's not. But it takes a while to figure that out. Anyway, got married, um, went on to George Mason University, got tenure at Mason. I said to my husband, it's time. We should start a family now, because I always knew I wanted to have a family. I always knew I wanted to have a lot of kids. And I should mention too that some of the things that I did and participated in were, you could say, broadly speaking, feminist, but I was never a real hardcore feminist. I never identified as a feminist,
Mm.
really. I was more of a careerist type of feminist. There are a lot of people who are feminist in that way, especially in that era.
Was
Um,
there something, can I ask, was there something about the feminist movement? Because that's also kind of, the era that you're describing as you're growing up and coming of age. That's also kind of the heyday of
yes.
what we think of sort of like, modern feminism. Was there something about that movement or its ideas that turned you off, or you
Yes.
disagreed with, or was it just
Yeah.
sort of a, yeah, they're doing their thing, I'm doing my thing kind of?
No, the women should get educated and have a career. I liked that part.
Hmm.
The Marxist control of the economy that these people were promoting as part of their package, because they were all Marxists of one sort or another, and
Hmm.
that became clear, as time went on. That became very clear. But you didn't have to. You didn't. It doesn't take a PhD in economics to figure out that what they're talking about doesn't work. You know, because they were talking about they wanted equality, and that equality of wages was um, the driving motivation for a lot of the things that they were saying. And so they were saying things like, well, therefore, you can't have babies. I mean, they didn't say
Yeah.
you can't have babies, but you could immediately figure out. I mean, it doesn't take much to figure out that babies are the thing that are driving the difference between men and women in the
Right.
labor force, right? And
Right.
that's a whole branch of, at that time, that was a whole branch of economics that I was very familiar with. We knew in the late 1960s, people already knew that never married women and never married men earned the same
Hmm.
amount of money, that there was no difference, right? And so that it was marriage and children that was driving the whole ship. Well, children is not just having a baby, it's the whole thought process, the whole plan. What kind of job am I going to have? What expectations do I have for myself? All of that. And so the feminists were banging on that from the very beginning. They knew that. They're still angry that there are not as many women in the STEM sciences, in the hard sciences, as there are men. They're still angry about that. They still resent that. See, it doesn't really take that much to see that that was a power grab, right? And that they were trying to control and direct people in ways they had no business telling people how you're supposed to feel and what you're supposed to
Hmm.
want. And but they
Hmm.
were, and they did, and they succeeded. I mean, they really succeeded in driving people's views about what a woman should be and do and
Oh yeah.
want and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Um, so that was never attractive to me, Steve. I was never, I could see through that right away. But anyway, the real turning point was after I had been at Mason for a few years and I got tenure, and I said, let's start a family. And then we couldn't, then we had
Hmm.
infertility. And
Hmm.
my plan had been, and this is related to what we were just talking about. My plan had been that I would have a baby, and the baby would be born in May, and then I would take care of the baby during the summer, and then when fall came, I would go back to work, and I would never miss a day of work. And I knew women who had done that. I had female colleagues, and none of them had ever missed a day of work, right? This was like a point of pride and everything like that. And so, the baby didn't arrive on schedule. I was like, what is going on here? And so that was the first time in my adult life that I couldn't get what I wanted by staying on this script, and
Right.
doing the feminist script. And that's what really precipitated the spiritual crisis that led me to come back to the Catholic faith, while I was at Mason. And I always like to give credit to the person who helped me, which was Father Bob Solinsky, who was the chaplain at the university, at George Mason, who led me through that whole process and led me through getting an annulment and convalidating my marriage vows with my husband, and all he guided me through that. And one thing I would also like to say is that when I had the abortion, I knew immediately that it was wrong. I felt bad about it immediately. It's
Hmm.
like you're in a moment of crisis, and the abortion deals with the crisis. But when the crisis is gone, your conscience comes back.
Hmm.
And I didn't have anybody to coach me through that. I'm sure all your pregnancy care ladies who are going to be watching this show, all your pregnancy care ladies, they know that. They've seen it. They've seen it dozens of times.
Right.
The people who come through the door. Um, and there is a body of research by psychologists and others showing that a significant subset of women feel terrible about their abortions, and it has long-lasting, sometimes devastating, but certainly significant psychological consequences: depression, anxiety, substance abuse, that type of stuff. Well, during that period of time, between the time I had the abortion and the time I encountered Father Selinsky, right, in that period of time, I had been to, I'd had many things I was upset about, and I had night terrors, and I couldn't sleep, and I had anniversary anxiety, when
Mm,
around the time the baby would have been born. That's a thing. Your pregnancy
wow.
care ladies know that. Um, I had been to numerous therapists, and I would sometimes say, "Do you think this could have something to do with the abortion?" And they would always say, "Oh, no,
Hmm.
no, couldn't possibly have anything to do with it."
Wow.
So there I am back with Father Selinsky after a 12-year lapse, and I said, and this, of course, was one of the first things I confessed, obviously. And he's the first things out of his mouth. Do you believe God is taking care of your baby? And do you believe God can forgive you? And I'm like,
Mm,
ah,
of course.
I mean,
Wow.
it's like he went right to the heart of the thing. He wasn't afraid to go right to the core issue,
Yeah.
that this was a serious wrong. I felt bad for a reason. I felt it was correct that I felt bad. And the psychology profession was like trying to put a band-aid on it, or pretend it was okay, and all that kind of stuff's like, oh my gosh. So that was really, I would say that, I got the annulment, and that was all settled by 1988. And I mark that date as the date that I was finally back in the faith and everything. So yeah, that's
Did,
that's a big turning point, I would say.
Jennifer, did your husband end up coming with you into the Catholic Church? Is he Catholic
No,
or no? Okay.
no, he's not. He's still not. He's still not. But we raised our children Catholic, and now the story. Then the next big phase of the story is how we resolved our infertility. We explored a lot of things. Interestingly enough, um, artificial reproduction and third-party reproduction was becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like it is now, but it was becoming a thing, and so it was being presented to us and stuff. And I just thought it was gross. I mean, I didn't have any real reason. I just thought it was icky. I didn't want to do it. And so I actually have had that experience. I mentioned this because whenever I talk about third party reproduction and what's wrong with it, or artificial reproduction and what's wrong with it, a lot of times women will want to say, well, you don't understand what it's like. I do understand what it's
Yeah.
like. I had 4 years of really, it's a miserable experience. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and on our podcast, we have a whole series of things now on IVF and infertility and that kind of thing. And you will too, Steve, because you'll do one of these like every week, and then sooner or later you'll have a whole library of material that'll be
That
great.
those topics are just they're fascinating. What's been I'm sure you've run into this too many times. Even talking to faithful, devout, practicing Catholics, the disconnect on those issues, the lack of understanding of why
Yeah,
some of them as simple as, well, wait a minute, we're Catholic. I thought the church was like have more kids, have a lot of kids. If you're
right,
struggling, why would you not do IVF? That doesn't even make any sense. Like, the
right.
church is contradicting. I guess it's one of those things where when I look back, I think there was no reason to be surprised. I should have anticipated that kind of a disconnect, even again, and really faithful and devout Catholics, but they've just never been told. No one has
Right.
ever walked them through an explanation or laid out an argument as to why that might not be the thing to
And
do.
and and however, our guys have called it from the very beginning. So
Right?
it's latent in
Yeah.
Humana Vitae. And then Ratzinger pulled it out in some of the documents that he was writing in the 80s. Am I right? I mean, in the 80s, didn't he
Yeah.
have something? And then later in the early 2000s, and it's all laid out there. And now it's becoming more and more obvious just what the abuses are, right?
Yeah.
And what the potential for the
Yeah.
abuse is. And, so it's kind of a mess, but by the time the sad thing is, by the time enough people figure out, hey, this is a humanitarian catastrophe, is what it really
Right.
is. By
Right.
the time people figure that out, it'll be so ingrained. It's going to be really hard, to really deal with it. But
And it
but
will by that point it will have touched so many people, either directly or indirectly,
Correct.
to be able to turn around and say, no, this is just wrong. This is not.
Something's wrong here.
It gets
Yeah, yeah.
harder to do
And
when there's a personal connection in there somewhere. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And every aspect of the sexual revolution's like that. I mean,
Yes.
we could go through piece by piece and realize, well, I don't want to hurt the feelings of my gay nephew. I don't want to hurt the feelings of
Hmm.
my daughter-in-law who's going through IVF, or whatever it is. It just or the granddaddy of them all, my divorced family members. I don't want to say anything against divorce, even though the catastrophe of divorce is like playing out right next door, and you can see how bad
Yes.
it is. But you don't want to say anything.
Mm.
It's very complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it requires a special kind of fortitude, and we're not
Um,
always
yeah.
up to it.
So I want to ask you. So you're describing this as kind of your personal conversion, returning to the faith. Father Solinsky, of course, just kind of helping shepherd you
Right.
through that process. Which, again, one of the fascinating things in what you're sharing, having gone to therapy, having worked with psychologists or psychiatrists about what you were struggling with, the fact that for that industry to just put a label on it, the abortion is not even on the table. That's not
Right.
even an option to consider as to what might
Right.
be at the heart of the real struggles you're experiencing. And then when you get to the Catholic Church, when you begin coming home, that's the first thing right out of
Yeah.
the gates. That's what we need to talk about, deal with, get healed, get forgiven,
Right.
begin. That's a fascinating contrast, actually. I
I
think.
agree. I agree. And there's a parallel in some of the work that the Ruth Institute is doing now,
Hmm.
on homosexuality. Okay, I'm telling you, the whole psychological psychiatric profession, the idea that a homosexual desire could be problematic in and of itself,
Right.
that it could arise from something problematic, it could have problematic consequences, so on. That's off the table. It's completely off the table. Gay is normal, gay is healthy. The fact that we have higher rates of substance abuse, suicidality, depression, anxiety, that's all because straight people are mean to them. If
That's
we
right.
just got rid of that, everything would be fine. Not a single one of those points is correct, factually. Not a
Yep.
single one.
Yep.
And we now have all kinds of evidence, either directly or indirectly, pointing to the fact that those points are factually incorrect, right? And they just don't want to deal with it. They
Yeah.
just do not want to deal with it. So, and that means that the people who have the homosexual experience or the same-sex desire, those people are struggling with very little in the way of accurate information,
Yeah.
because the whole profession is designed to protect a set of ideas, and that's what the ban on conversion therapy counseling, that's what that's all about. That's circling the wagons around the born gay myth,
Yeah.
because people can change, and me having a conversation with you about my unwanted same-sex attraction, if that could be helpful to me, that's kind of a problem for the whole
Yeah.
the whole structure that they have. So yeah, it's really interesting.
And
I
you've seen that up close and personal on all the I want to get to the Ruth Institute too, and
yeah.
give you a
Yeah,
chance to introduce that to folks who maybe haven't heard of it yet. But at what point did kind of the personal conversion begin to sort of coalesce into, I think this is actually what I want to do, or feel called
oh,
to do?
that
Like
took a lot. Okay, let's back up here. Okay, so 1988, I'm converted. I wasn't 100% converted on contraception. That took longer. That was
mm,
the last shoe to drop for
mm-hmm,
me. Okay,
mm-hmm,
um, but the way we resolved our infertility was in 1990, the end of 1990. Children became available for adoption in Eastern Europe. I don't know how old you are. I don't know how old your audience is, but the Berlin Wall went down in 1989.
right.
Christmas 1989. The people of Romania executed Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Irena, and there was just that was the end of an era. In 1989 and 1990. And so it was starting to become available that children were available to be adopted. So at Thanksgiving 1990, we put in our paperwork for adoption from Romania. And in January, we got a phone call from the adoption agency saying, "We have a little boy for you. When you get
Hmm.
him, he will be 2.5 years old. We know his name and his birthday. He's described as being in good health. What do you say?" And we said, "Sure, why not?" Because we'd been infertile for 4 years. You don't really believe a baby will actually ever show up. So,
Wow.
sure, send us the little boy. And then 10 days later, I went to the doctor with a head cold and I found out that I was pregnant.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah, so as things unfolded, we ended up with two children within 6 months' time who were 3 years apart in chronological age. And our little boy, when he arrived, so we had a boy who arrived by airplane and a girl who arrived in the usual way, you know.
Hmm.
And there were a lot of children who arrived in the greater Washington, D.C. area around that same time. Couples like ours, who are sort of like ours, you know, that two-earner couple put it off a while to have children. You know, now they're in their 30s, educated, income, but no babies, you know. So there were a bunch of these kids, and they all had the same set of problems, Steve. You know, they all had behavior problems. They couldn't speak. They wouldn't make eye contact,
Sure.
and a whole series of, minor things that if I described them would be, we'd be here all day. Um, and of course, our daughter didn't have any of those things. You know, she grew up in the normal sort of way. Her development was normal. Her development was on time. You know, all of that. And and we had to teach our son to do things that she learned automatically, that just kind of came in, but we had to actually, instruct our son that no, you have to look at a person when you talk to them.
Wow.
And if we went to play peekaboo with them, we had so many wonderful people helping us because we needed help. We didn't know what we were dealing with, so we
Hmm.
had speech therapists and behaviorists and I forget, physical therapy and occupational therapy. We encountered all these professionals, so we learned a lot that we wouldn't have learned, in PhD economics school. No, I would not have learned any of that, right? And and so I just came to respect the fact that the ordinary things that moms and dads do instinctively and without thinking have amazing developmental consequences, right? So when you're rocking the baby, I use this example all the time. When you're rocking your baby, you're helping part of their central nervous system develop. When you're looking at the baby, when you're nursing them, you're helping their brain develop. And it's the limbic brain. It's the part of the brain that makes connections and that sees faces and that responds to people. Well, now you take a baby and you put him in a crib and you strap a bottle in there and you have the baby feed himself, right? You have no idea what you just did. You have
Wow.
no idea how much didn't happen that should have happened. Um, so all this is going on in our house. I finally quit teaching. My husband said, "Let's get out of here. Let's get out of DC." And he went to he got a job in Silicon Valley, and I said, "I'm out of here. Let's go." Um, but in that period of time, we were very preoccupied. It was a period of time that I was basically out of the labor market. I had
Hmm.
a period where I was, part time, maybe like a quarter time, something like that, giving lectures, writing things, that kind of stuff. But I was clear, and my employers were clear. My first priority is the babies and my
Yeah.
husband. That's the first priority. So, I'm 100% convicted about that, and it would have been better if we had known from the beginning, but we didn't. We figured it out, and, so on and so forth. But anyway, the contrast between those two children and their development proved to me that children need their parents. And this should be obvious, but children need their parents. And so the combination of that, plus my econ training, plus having been a libertarian, all of that swirled around in my mind to say, look, what we're doing in society that looks like it's freedom, it's not freedom. It's a mess. It's a hot mess because it's it's at odds with the truth of the human person. The human person is a baby. The human person is not rational economic man born at age 18, ready to make contracts and
Mm-hmm.
keep promises and give value for value in the market. You know, that's not how it happens, right? And so that's my first book was called Love and Economics. It was my book about motherhood and why society needs moms. You know, why, if you don't have somebody doing what moms do, creating attachments between yourself and the child, you can't have a free society. You're going to have the kids are going to be unhinged. You know, and you know, I wrote that book in 2001, and the kids are more and more unhinged today than they were then. You know, and by the way, our boy is doing fine. I need to say that, you know, that he turned out to be fine, and he's a very gentle soul actually. Um, but we didn't know that when he was 5. You know, we didn't know how it was going to.
Yeah.
You know, but we didn't know how that was going to turn out. So that's why we had to really be invested in it.
That's a
But
no, I was just gonna say that that's a fascinating lens through which to look at the sexual revolution and the question of whether this is a good idea, whether
right,
how we're reconstructing relationships, sex, marriage, male, female, family, the whole, whether this is a good idea. You actually had this lived experience of two very different outcomes, and that gave you a window on it. And then I mean, even in the great conspiracy of grace that we're all living, even your formal academic training also gives you again a window into some of the deeper issues and deeper questions that a lot of people wouldn't think to ask because
I think that's right. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that because I think that's true. And I really do feel, and I said this, we actually created a video about Charlie Kirk.
Mhm.
And I was speaking to his young followers and I was speaking to them about vocation, you know, and how do you work out what you're supposed to do? You know, you're not going to be exactly like Charlie, you know, you're going to be like however God made you to be and whatever God's giving for you to do. God can use absolutely everything that has ever happened to you
That's right.
for his purposes. He can take every piece of garbage you ever did and every piece of injustice that ever happened to you and he can transform all of that and use that. I think that's 100%. And the
That's
more
right.
you lean into that, the more you see how true it is and the more you'll be what he wants you to be. And that's the optimal plan. God's plan is the optimal plan. We always optimize in economics. The optimal plan is God's plan. You cannot top God's plan. I'm just going to say that as a
That's
professional economist.
that's a beautiful. There's a saying, and I'm the worst guy in the world at citing my sources, so I have no idea who came up with this. It just wasn't me. That's all.
Okay.
Someone once said the Holy Spirit never wastes our sin or our suffering. And
Oh, that's cool.
I just thought
Yeah.
it's a lovely way to say it. You know, sin we've repented of, suffering that we've endured, the Holy Spirit will use that. It becomes
Right.
part of our story, of course,
That's
um,
right.
but He'll use that for other people.
That's right.
Help us see
Yes.
things that, yeah, just
That's why I mentioned the infertility thing. You know, when I was going through that, I had no idea that that would turn out to be of value. You know, it was like it was just miserable. Get it out of my face. I don't want to. You know, um, but but the reality is, you know, I can empathize with what a couple's going through, and yeah, I mean, yeah, and I because I've been in it, I can say, you know what? Do you and your husband feel the same way about it? And of course, the answer is always no. You know that men and women react very differently to the
right,
infertility experience. You know,
right,
how do I know that? I know that because we lived that. You know, and he didn't understand me, and I didn't understand him, and it was a period of a lot of growth because of that. But oh my gosh, painful growth, horrible. You know, like no, you don't volunteer for this stuff. But when our Lord gives it to you, you have to trust that it's going to turn out to be of value. Um,
hmm,
but the other thing I want to say about it, Steve, that I do think is worth mentioning, the training that I had in economics, we're trained to think systematically. We're trained to look at social systems, and
hmm,
so I looked at this marriage as a system. and I started thinking, well, if we tell people they don't have to get married before they have a child, how is that going? What's the next consequence of that, right? And so in economics, like if the price of eggs changes, what happens to the farmers, and what happens to the price of butter, and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So I'm asking myself, if you don't have to be married in order to have a child, what does that do to your ability to nurture that child and give the child what they need? Well, you have to have a job. If you have to have a job, that means someone else will be taking care of the child. Will that person take the same kind of care that you would take of them?
Mm.
Almost certainly not, right? And you can think, well, I'm independent. I'm a single mom. By golly, I'm doing this all on my own. Well, no, that's not really true. You've replaced your husband with a employer who's giving you money and a daycare provider who's taking care of the child. Neither of those people love you.
Yeah.
Neither of them love you.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you have a lousy husband. Okay, I get that that happens. But you know for a fact that a lot of people have husbands who love them and who love the child and who are committed to that and who are engaged in that. And that's what you want to build. That's what you want to focus on. And if you replace every personal human relationship with a commercial relationship, that's not just expanding the free market. And so isn't that wonderful that we have more markets? No, that's replacing. Yes, the market is a system of cooperation, and that's a good thing. I get that. But there are other systems of cooperation, like marriage, and religious experience and stuff like that. There are multiple systems of cooperation. That's what we need to be looking at. And so, my economics training and my libertarian instincts and stuff like that, all of that, ended up being part of the mix of how I thought about things. And, Steve, the first book that I wrote, Love and Economics, the original subtitle of that book was Why the Laissez-Faire Family Doesn't Work.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was the original subtitle of it. To just say, just letting everybody do what they want, it's not necessarily all going to work out. And there's no invisible hand there, And that was kind of a fail as a title because most of the radio show hosts didn't know what I was talking about.
Right.
And couldn't even pronounce it.
Right. I
So
was just gonna say, couldn't even read the title, let alone explain it.
yeah, So anyway, um,
When you, Jennifer, when you wrote Love and Economics, so as you've been elucidating here, sort of the thesis is there are natural God-given relationships and commitments which cannot just be farmed out to the economy and the government without real consequences.
right.
Love is very different as a bond and a reason for doing those kind of things like taking care of your children or providing for a spouse than just sort of the well-oiled functioning economic system or inputs. Um, did you get pushback on that thesis? Did you have some? I mean, did anyone show up to kind of argue with you about that point and say, "Listen, we're still recalibrating the system. We haven't been at this that long. It's kind of this is a new paradigm for society, but eventually we'll get it all kind of calibrated nicely, and it'll click along, and we'll find that your thesis is actually incorrect. You can absolutely farm out parenting and spousal support to a welfare state or to the economy."
Um, indirectly, of course, I got pushback all the time because the whole system pushes back against it with those type of arguments. But as a practical matter, I was not in academic life, so I was not encountering
Mm,
colleagues,
okay.
in the conference room the way you might normally be. But I didn't care. I was doing what I needed to be doing. I needed to be at home, and let's see, that would have been 2001. The kids were my daughter was 10, my son was 13.
Okay.
Roughly when that book came out, right? Um, but my free market economics friends kind of all abandoned me. None of them remained friends with me
Mm,
after that, pretty much.
mm,
With the following very interesting exception: any of them who had a faith commitment liked the book a lot. And it didn't matter whether they were Roman Catholics, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Mormons, evangelicals, they got the point, and they were grateful that I was articulating something that they had an intuition about,
Interesting.
right? Because, yeah, they had a framework that allowed them to understand it.
Right. Right.
Um, People who were completely lapsed Catholics or people who were non-believers of whatever sort, they didn't want to hear it. I'm 100% convinced. It's not that I have lost an intellectual argument. It's that there are people who don't believe it because they don't want to believe it,
Hmm.
because they have, something they're doing, that they want to feel is okay. So,
That piece of it, the I don't want to hear it. I don't want to have to consider whether or not maybe that, because the argument that you make in the book, of course, is a proposal to rethink the way we're structuring everything,
right,
which means, and this is a point I think that was, I mean, it's been underscored in all kinds of ways. It's been underscored in the way we do economics. It's been underscored in the way that this stuff is taught in our school systems. It's been underscored in jurisprudence and legislation. That once you, I mean, in a sense, I guess it's just sort of saying once the Pandora's box is open, good luck trying to
right.
put it back and close it up again. But just the reality that, well, now people have come to construct their lives around this set of sexual revolutionary ideas, the freedom, the self-expression, the I'm my own happiness is the lens through which I filter any consideration of a commitment, etc. Does it serve my purposes? Does it make me happy? If so, I might take on a commitment. If not, then I don't need to take on a commitment or keep one I've already made. I, in a sense, what your counter proposal is saying, I know we've all begun to arrange our lives and our priorities and our finances and our families and our commitments around this paradigm, uh, but it doesn't work, and
Right.
it's doing
Right.
a lot of damage, and it's going to do a lot of damage. Therefore, I'd like to politely propose that we do an about face, and we turn out to just not be willing to consider doing an about face. There's just too much I've got
Well,
committed.
yeah, yes and no, Steve. Yes and
Hmm.
no. And here's what I mean by that. Um, the yes is that the people of approximately our age group who have made their commitments, who have made their big life commitments and so on, they're not willing to reconsider. A lot of them are not willing to reconsider, but their kids definitely are open to hearing stuff,
Mm.
and I do think that right now, we're recording this in September of 2025. I think there are a lot of younger people who are fed up with the baby boomers. It's like they have made a mess of things and we're looking for something else. And the young men who are showing up in traditional Catholic masses and stuff like that.
Right.
There is a group of young people, a significant set of young people who realize things aren't working and they're not committed to it or attached to it in the same way that you and I might have been. When we made our initial decisions, and we feel like we have to defend them for the rest of our lives. Um, so it cuts both ways. The people who are on the receiving end of the disloyalty, right? Those people, some of them are able to see it. And so at some point, after I started the Ruth Institute, and we've been working at some of these topics in the public square for a while, at some point we really started focusing on the people who've been specifically harmed by the
Yeah.
sexual revolution, the
Yeah.
victims, the survivors, the people who had things done to them,
Hmm.
such as children of divorce. I mean, that was one of our first big groups that we wanted to talk about. We still talk about. Um, and people who did things that didn't turn out the way they expected, and there was really nobody to catch them. When things start falling apart, nobody there to help them. So all of those type of things, to call attention to the fact that there has been a downside. There has been a downside, and how long are you going to ignore the downside? People in the pro-life movement, in one sense, have an easier argument, because if you get the main point, oh, you've just killed a baby. Oh, I want to help you save babies. That's pretty clear,
Right.
if you
Right.
if you admit the opening point that that's a baby and we're going to save the babies, by golly, the pro-lifers can organize support around that idea. It's a little bit harder for people to see, but on the other hand, if people don't admit the premise that it's really a baby, then they're 100%, 1,000% opposed to it. right.
Yeah.
So anyway,
To talk a little bit about just the founding of the Ruth Institute. I know in our conversations when you've been on the podcast, on the Catholic conversation with Becky and I, um, we talked a little bit about you sort of you had a founding vision for it and a sense of, I think these are the issues that I'm being called to begin this apostolate to address. And that continues to be the case. You still do are addressing those issues, but you've also talked about how the mission of the Ruth Institute has had to change and adapt, and you now find yourself working on and addressing issues that you never would have thought would have been part of this work.
yeah,
Give us a little bit of background
yeah,
on the Ruth Institute project.
yes, yes. So I started the Ruth Institute in 2008 because my kids were getting older and I could see, kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and and I had no desire to go back to academic life or anything like that. And so I started the Ruth Institute 2008 in San Diego at my dining room table, basically. And I date the founding of it as August 1st, 2008, because that's the day I hired my first employee. This nice young lady graduated from Gonzaga, and she came down and she found a place to live in San Diego, and we started the Ruth Institute. My vision was that we were going to talk to college students, particularly college age women, about the themes in love and economics,
Hmm.
about why you shouldn't be afraid to start your family. Your brain will not turn to mush, I promise. It will be hard, but it will be worth it. And and society needs you to do this job. That
Hmm.
the attachment between you and your baby is socially productive and constructive, and you're going to enjoy it. You're going to love it. I already knew that there was a demand to hear that. I already knew there were young ladies who wanted to hear that message. And so that's what I thought I was going to do. But around that exact same time, and it's interesting to me that you remember that, because I don't remember when you and I first met, or what all was going on, or
Yeah.
anything, but around that exact same time is when Proposition 8 came on the scene in San Diego. And
Uh,
Proposition 8, people may remember, was the ballot proposition in California that said marriage shall be the union of one man and one woman, and that was going to be in the Constitution of the state of California. That's what the issue was. That started in San Diego. Okay.
hmm.
At that time, our auxiliary bishop was Salvatore Corleone, and he kind of pulled the pieces together. He knew the rich donors, the rich Catholics, put up the money to get that on the ballot. Once it was on the ballot, then an interfaith coalition came together to get it passed. That's what was going on in the summer of 2008. And because see, I had all this information about how children need married mothers and fathers, and how the presence of the father is a value, and supports the mother in doing the bonding work that needs to be done, and all of that.
Right.
I had a lot of information by that time, and I didn't really want to talk about gay stuff. I wasn't. I had never talked about gay marriage. I had never thought about gay marriage. Um, but that issue was in front of me, and I didn't feel I could sit out on the sidelines in
Yeah.
good conscience,
Yeah.
knowing what I knew, because I could see, I didn't have it all worked out in my mind, but I could see this couldn't be a good thing, because you're going to disrupt the natural bond between the mother, the father, and the baby. And I hadn't thought through everything about that, but I could, you don't have to think it all through to realize this is not a great idea. Over time, I have thought it through, more and more, and everything points to that original intuition being correct. But
Okay.
anyway, that's what the Ruth Institute ended up doing, and that changed everything, and that's why we are where we are today, with being kind of the full stop shop, the one stop shop, full service operation for anything against the sexual revolution, or to put it positively, anything that promotes Catholic teaching, authentic Catholic teaching about marriage, family, and human sexuality. That's what the Ruth Institute is.
Yeah, it's been such a blessing. It's such a beautiful apostolate. And yeah, and again, praise God that again in this conspiracy of grace that we're all living, uh, you were available by virtue of responding to the what you felt called to do,
Yeah.
You were available then to take on this much larger and farther reaching role than you had originally envisioned. But that's been such a help to so many. I was just thinking, I this will be, oh, I don't know, maybe 3 4 years ago. Becky and I were we were invited to a Newman Center to give a presentation on marriage. So it's, it's all college age kids, and we were essentially, I think, just kind of pitching the Catholic vision for marriage and the standard and et cetera, and using ourselves as kind of exhibit A of how messy and imperfect that can be. But there's beauty in that struggle as well. And I just, one of those moments that just sticks with you. I know you've had many too. At the end, they open it up for questions. And one of the young ladies took the microphone and kind of tearing up a little bit, she just said, thank you for being here. And I love what you're saying. And it just sounds beautiful. What would you say to someone who has never seen it? And of
Yeah.
course, what this dear young lady is saying is, that sounds like fairyland to me. I've never seen anywhere. That
Right.
means her grandparents, her aunts, her uncles, her own parents. She's never seen it. She doesn't know what that even looks like. When you've run into that, what has been your response? Because that's, she was asking. She wasn't saying it in any kind of like sarcastic or challenging way. She was saying it in a heartbroken way. I want to
Right.
believe that vision is possible, but I've never seen it. What do you say to me? Like, what do I do? How do I figure this out on my, kind of like, I guess probably she's thinking I have to pull myself up by my own bootstraps
Yeah.
somehow, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I've seen. I get a different version of that question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or not, it's not even a question. A lot of times, I now work into my talks um, something about the impact of divorce on children from the
Mm,
child's perspective, and just talk about how painful it is for the child and how unjust it is for the child. And so the reaction that I frequently get, for a while I was having kids run out of the room crying. Okay. And so it was
wow.
like, that's not great.
Wow.
but now I have them coming up afterwards crying,
Mm-hmm.
and saying to me, you're the first adult I have ever heard say that
Mm,
divorce is hard on children. You're the
mm,
first adult I've ever, it's like my brother and I figured it out, sort of, but, you know, yeah. So it's a version of the same thing that you're talking about. But I try to tell them, to be spiritually hopeful. I get that there's no natural reason for you to be hopeful. I understand that. But spiritually, there is every reason to be hopeful. And it would be helpful for you to surround yourself with people who are getting it and who are doing it right
mm-hmm.
up to a
Mm-hmm.
point. That's probably the most helpful thing that you can do for yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And you can't, if you at some point hear that vision uh, for marriage and family life that the church offers, proposes, and it seems impossible. Uh, I mean, one of the realities is you can't get there by just doing the sexual revolution. That's just
oh,
not
you'll
where
never
that,
make it.
it's
Yeah,
just not
that's
where it ends
not
up.
that can't be done. That really can't be done. Yeah, yeah. You need to turn your back on that in as decisive a manner as you can manage. And most people don't turn their back on it all at once. I think. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think what happened to me is probably pretty typical. That okay, this didn't work. This didn't. The church was right about abortion. The church was right about divorce. The church was right about sex before marriage, because that really was really stupid and really didn't help me whatsoever. Finally, oh yeah, they were right about contraception too. Huh. Like, dang. They were right again. I detect a pattern here.
That's right.
you know, so but there are young people who are being brought up with more and more of it, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's not as big a mystery as it was. In my day, people took for granted the goods that system was producing. People took those goods for granted, and so undervalued them compared to the kind of the false promise of what was being
Right.
offered. Well, now we can see that the promise was false, You know, the idea you're going to be happier if people can have any sex they want with anyone they want under any circumstances they want, everyone will be happier. Most people can figure out that's probably not true. You know, and you don't have to try it multiple times to work it out. You know, there's
Mhm.
some of that now because there's enough wreckage around that people can see around them. They don't have to do it all. But I think our role, certainly at the Ruth Institute and probably yours too, our role is to help people recognize the wreckage so they don't have to do the experiments themselves. You know,
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
want you to have to do trial and error here
Yeah.
because the errors are catastrophic. And the errors are becoming more and more catastrophic. As the revolution progresses, the mistakes that young people make today are literally irrevocable. You know, they're damaging their bodies in ways that cannot be repaired. They're doing unimaginable damage to their psyches, um, and harm to people around them and everything like that. You know, what we did in the 70s was bad enough, but we could walk a lot of it back, you know.
Hmm.
Uh,
I want to lean into that point for a minute. Have you lean into that point for a minute? You were on maybe a year or so ago with Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas, and
uh-huh.
you were having a conversation about all, free range about all kinds of things. But you spent some time, the two of you, kind of bouncing back and forth the idea that, where we are, because I think a lot of people, and not just religious people or Catholics, but a lot of people, I think, are looking at where we have arrived in the culture, especially on the question of sex and human identity and male and female, and are just bewildered. How on earth did we get here? Where did this come from? What on earth is going on? And you were doing a really lovely job of saying, well, this is still just the sexual revolution. It's morphed a bit. It's become kind of an anthropological revolution now. It's undermining our ability to really understand clearly what it means to be human or to be a man or woman. But you said something in that conversation that really stuck with me. You said at this point in history, pretty much everybody is both a victim and a perpetrator of the sexual revolution, which for me, that was one of those just light bulb comments where I thought, oh gosh, that's so true. And the implications of that for even just for wrestling with the idea that there might be something wrong are just so deep. Just lean into that a little bit, that idea that at this point, kind of everybody is both victim and perpetrator. We're some generations into this now. Uh, and, and how do you present to someone the idea that no, this is still this is where the sexual revolution was always headed?
Well, you asked me about four things right there. but the insight that everybody's both a victim and a perpetrator, that came to me. I don't think I figured that out on my own. Somebody else said that to me one time, and it's like, yeah, but bingo, that's true. It's because of the amount. It's because we're swimming in this cultural soup. You know, like a fish doesn't recognize water because that's what they're surrounded with. That's what they're used to. You know, that's how we are now with some of the presuppositions and ideas of the sexual revolution, and it's worth pausing to think about why that is. That's happened to us because the premises of the sexual revolution are not correct. They're not factually correct. They're not grounded in reality. So if you're going to build your life around and your society around the idea that sex is normally a sterile activity, kids don't need their parents, the body is not a big deal, the sex of the body is not a big deal. If you're going to build a society around those things, you're going to need a lot of propaganda to keep that going because
Mm,
none of those things are
mm.
true. Evidence is going to flare up all the time that contradicts it. You're going to have to tamp that down. That means more propaganda, you know. And so we really have been swimming in an ideological soup for a long time, where it's hard to see clearly. It's like being in a fog or cloudy water or something like that, you know. And so of course you're going to do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are doing stupid stuff, and our Lord Himself will judge the ultimate culpability of each and every one of us, and
Right.
He will do so justly. So I'm not worried about Him. He knows what's going on. But for each of us, we have to ask ourselves honestly. Okay, I was swimming. lot of misinformation. At the same time, at some point, I chose to embrace something, and I kind of could have known,
Mm,
but I kind of didn't want to know. So
mm-hmm.
there's a lot of examination of conscience that I think is part of outgrowing the sexual revolution, if you want to put it that way. The people I know who have walked away from some significant part of the sexual revolution, maybe the ex-gays or the people who have recovered from divorce, people who've recovered from divorce or the hookup culture, anything like that. There's significant part of their process that includes self-examination and saying, yeah, I was surrounded by nonsense and or worse, but at some point I embraced this, I did it for that reason, and kind of own your part of it,
Yeah,
without
yeah.
beating yourself up, without being unjust to yourself, but nonetheless being responsible for yourself. It's a delicate dance, and I wouldn't presume to do that for someone else, but I would recommend it to anyone. Anybody who's watching this podcast. I don't know your story, but you know your story. Jesus knows your story. Take it up with him and think about it. Think it through. I embraced this because I could have known it was wrong. I kind of had a hint it couldn't be right, but I did it anyhow. Um, that's the dance, I think, Steve. Do,
Yeah,
do you see what I mean?
absolutely. I think that's such an important insight for a couple of reasons. One, I'm sure you run into it all the time, and folks who've engaged with Ruth Institute, especially young people. I the context for what I'm going to say in response to what you said is, over the years, Becky and I, actually working with Mike and Sharon Phelan and Father John Lankett out here, we've been blessed to be part of a marriage prep team that presents kind of a one-day seminar on theology of the body. It's I can't tell you how many times. And then these are couples that are getting ready to get married in the Catholic Church. So at least one of them is Catholic, nominally at least. I can't tell you how many times at the end of those days, someone has come up, often in tears, usually approaching either Sharon or Becky, and just saying, "Why have I never heard this
Heard this
before?"
before.
It's heartbreaking because of course you know what they're saying, exactly what you just said. I have made choices in ignorance, blindness, in the dark, because it was just what you do. It's just the default. I didn't know. I'd never heard an alternative, etc. So there's
Right.
that piece, which is, I think, again, I think you're right. You had alluded to it earlier. I think it is true that so what were Gen Z, Gen Alpha millennials, they're a couple, they're the byproduct of a couple generations of the sexual revolution kind of running full tilt. And there's
Right.
so much damage and so much wreckage and so much brokenness that I think a lot of them are waking up and saying, this was kind of done to me. So there's the element of I was deprived of
Right.
fundamental things that I needed, that I should have been given, that I should have been taught, that should, but at the same time, and this is why I really like that both victim and perpetrator kind of paradigm and that examination that you just alluded to. You do have to be honest with yourself and say, but I did make some decisions. I did make some choices. And if I'm really honest with myself, some of those I kind of knew were wrong. I
Right.
maybe couldn't have articulated the whole sophisticated, but it just give us your thoughts on that piece of it because I think that's so significant. You were deprived of things. You
Yeah.
had a
Yeah.
right to things you weren't given. But
Yeah, I think it's important to not wallow in the victimhood
hmm
because it's like you can see it and you need to see it. I think it's only just that you see it, right? That you were deprived of something that you should have had. But on the other hand, if you stay stuck in that phase, you will perpetually be a victim. You're going to be angry, you're going to be pointing your fingers, and none of that is constructive. The next step, the important step is, well, what do I do now?
yeah,
How do I take responsibility for the part that is mine? And as I take that step, I'll be able to see more things more clearly. And as I am able to see more things more clearly, then this relationship, I can see how I might be a force for good in this
mm,
damaged
hmm
relationship or that
hmm
damaged relationship. always knowing that the other person also has free will and can tell you to go fly a kite, or can say to you, I've been waiting for years for you to say that to me.
Mm.
And everything in between,
Hmm.
right? Um, so is that what you were looking for, Steve? I mean, I think that's that the balance of being in response to something and then taking responsibility for, that's something that we all have to do. And you're in a loving relationship when when you say to your spouse, I was wrong, I'm sorry I hurt you, and then he says, thank you for saying that to me, it means a lot to me, and I can see now why you did it, and I'm not as angry as
Yeah.
I might have been. There's a
Yeah.
way you can have a positive spiral. It doesn't
Hmm.
all have to be a downward
Hmm.
spiral,
Hmm.
right? And of course, we haven't mentioned his name, and I'm not going to mention his name, but the evil one is counting on us doing the downward spiral.
That's right. Yep.
And Jesus is inviting us to do the upward spiral, and that
Hmm.
he will be there on
Hmm.
every floor as we go up the steps. He will be there with us on every step. And every once in a while, he'll grab somebody and throw them right through the ceiling. They'll
That's
have
right.
such an amazing conversion experience.
Yeah.
But usually not. Usually there's.
And it's a lot easier to just circle the drain and allow yourself to be sucked down. And that to your point where the temptation to just say, well, I'm a victim, I was deprived of things, therefore that explains all my decisions and it's their fault. And you'll never, first of all, you'll never start making better decisions because you'll just
Right.
continue doing what you've been doing and blaming it on, real failures and people around you, etc. Whereas the upward spiral, that means climbing. That means
Right.
work. You're gonna have some gravity, especially cultural gravity, pushing against you. But that's the gift of grace. I love that. Uh, in your work and
Well,
in a
before you leave that point though,
yeah, yeah,
the great spiritual masters of the Catholic Church have always pointed to a process like that. It's a very common theme in the mystical writers, who are writing about the progress of the soul. Well,
yeah,
Teresa of Avila talks about the how you feel like you're just dragging these buckets of water, and it's so much work, and you're going uphill, and then by the time you get to the interior, the full interior castle, it's like water's gushing over you. Graces are just gushing over you,
yeah.
and that can be your story. Anybody who's listening now, that can be your story. It is your story. You're just in the early phases of it.
Yeah, as a Catholic, I'm so deeply grateful for the redemptive suffering. The idea that
Well,
suffering can purify and strengthen and make you something that you could have been without it. Just praise
right.
God for that. What I wanted to ask, so in your experience, um, what has, and this is another, I apologize because I'm asking questions that are kind of gigantic and multifaceted and ask you to just take a, but uh, the sexual revolution in all of its different forms and facets has done a lot of damage to our understanding of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. The extreme case, of course, would be someone who's struggling with gender dysphoria, who I'm biologically male, but I'm a woman. But even well short of that, just what does it mean to be a woman? What is a woman? What is a woman for? What's the gift of that sex? Conversely, what is a man? What does it mean to be a man? What is an authentic man like? What is it? Uh, what are some of the struggles you see in the people that you encounter um, to kind of understand and see and get their minds around authentic femininity, authentic masculinity, authentic womanhood and manhood, and maybe a little bit about what you think we can propose to people who are really struggling with that.
Well, boy, I don't know where to start. This really is a huge question. Obviously, I think the fundamental thing is that we don't know what it means to be a generic human in the first place, and
Mm,
we're all trying to be a
mm,
generic human as opposed to a man or a woman. But to me, the big insight is the human person is meant for love. We were created by God as an act of love from him for us, and we find our purpose and meaning in love and being loved and loving others. That's the real reality of, that's the core of the Christian message about human existence, is that at the core of it is love. And the modern world doesn't understand that. Economics doesn't understand that. Modern philosophy doesn't understand that. Radical individualism is all about denying that.
Hmm.
Um, and so what male and female does for us is it makes us aware of the other. The fact that we're sexually attracted to a person of the opposite sex means that we are aware of the other. It draws us. It's like when you're a baby, you're aware of your mommy because your mommy's protecting you and taking care of you and stuff like that. But it's all about, ultimately it's about you. As you get a little bit bigger and you're independent and you can do stuff, well, there for a while in childhood, you really are all about yourself, and you kind of need to be. You need to be focused on learning to walk and talk and just navigate through the world. Well, now puberty comes upon you and you have sexual desire coming for the first time. Well, a rightly ordered sexual desire takes you out of yourself and into attention for the other, not simply another individual, but another individual of the opposite sex who is not typologically like you, right? And now all of a sudden, that other person matters to you, in part because they can gratify you. You've got this itch that you want to scratch, right? And they can really do it for you, and you can't really do it yourself. And the substitutes that are you doing it yourself don't work as well at all. And normal people should know that. We shouldn't even have to talk about that. It should be obvious, right? That the design of the body is such that it draws you out of your self-centeredness and into desire and relationship with the other. And if you're really doing it right, that desire and that love for each other produces yet another being and a new person. And so the sexual act, the meaning of human sexuality, is not simply pleasure and gratification, personal gratification. This is the most social thing we do, Steve.
Right.
This is the most social aspect. This is where the basic sociability of the human person is written into the body. And the sexual act, the meaning of the sexual act is, I'm interested in another adult who's different from me, and now I produce a baby who's clearly different from me, right? So both the unitive and the procreative meaning of the sexual act are social, right? And so we've taken the most social thing that we do, or that's inscripted into our bodies, and we've turned it into a consumer good. This is just something we do to make ourselves happy, and it has no deeper meaning, it has no deeper significance. And of course it doesn't feel as good because of that. It's supposed to feel, we're doing it because it feels good, but it doesn't, it's missing the mark, right?
Right.
Because it's wrongly ordered, right? Because that kind of desire is wrongly ordered. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but I think it does answer your question.
Yeah,
Indirectly, I think it answers your question.
that's I love the context piece there of sort of the framework is love. And love properly understood, as you're saying, which is a gift of yourself and the receiving of another self as a gift of love. That's the standard, and that's the corrective too, I think. In a sense that's just the message, and has been since Jesus was walking among us, is love one another.
Right.
Work out the details on what that needs to look like in all of your relationships, but
Yeah.
love one another, and that'll orient you the way that you need to be oriented. Yeah, yeah, that's really
Well,
good.
I wrote about that. I wrote a book called Smart Sex: Finding Lifelong Love in a Hookup World.
Mm,
And that came out in 2005. That's an older book. And I was really, grappling with the fact that I don't think I called it the sexual revolution at that point, but I was grappling with the fact that what we've done, that the whole hookup culture was an inversion of rightly ordered sexuality. And
mm,
that book, by the way, that book and also Love and Economics, nothing at all to do with anything homosexual. That was
right,
not on my radar whatsoever.
right, right, right.
Looking at, and I remember, Steve, I remember around that time people asking me, sometimes somebody would ask me, well, what do you think about gay marriage? And I'd said, well, honestly, my goal here is to straighten out the straight people, and that seems to be a full-time job. And
Yeah.
everybody would laugh, and then we would go on and go back to talking what I thought was really the important point. But then gay marriage came on the scene, and it really took up all the air in the room. I remember in that period of time there were several books out about fatherlessness. David Blankenhorn was writing about it. Um, um, some names escape me, but there were
Hmm.
several people writing
Hmm.
about the significance of fatherlessness and the family breakdown in one way or the other. And all of that went away when gay marriage became a thing. You know, all of that, everything about that, it shifted and it changed. And that is, to my mind, that's one of the big lost. What am I trying to say? Missed opportunities.
Hmm.
That's a way to put it. That if gay marriage had not been the primary focus of public debate starting in 2008 and on until 2000 and on until today, really, if that had been bracketed, we could have made more progress on the fact that man-woman marriage was falling apart, and we needed to do something about that.
Hmm.
But you can't do anything about that when the gays are saying that the sex of the body has no meaning whatsoever, and let us do what you're doing.
Do
You
do
know.
you do you, Jennifer, are you saying that the good work that had begun addressing the problem of fatherlessness was just sort of so overshadowed by the whole gay marriage debate that it just kind of went away? Or are you saying that because there's a profound connection between fatherless children, especially fatherless boys, and homosexuality, it had to be kind of squelched or silent? Like you said, the data bubbles up. There's these things that
Yeah.
are being said and claimed that aren't true.
Yeah.
Things that are true that counter the narrative begin to, and so they get suppressed, they get squashed, they
Yeah.
get marginal. Or is it maybe a combination of those two, do you think?
Well, when I said it, what I meant was the first thing that you said.
Okay.
That it just
Okay.
it just absorbed everybody's attention, and so
Yeah.
you couldn't really think about it anymore. Um, is there a causal connection father between fatherhood and the development of homosexuality? I think that the answer to that is surely yes, but it's one of the things we're not allowed to talk about. We're
Right.
literally not allowed to talk about it.
Right.
Um, because the family dynamics aspect of the development of a same-sex attraction, more or less permanent same-sex attraction, people have been saying for a long time that a boy, in particular, a boy needs an attractive father figure to attach to. And if he doesn't, if the father is either not available or not attractive, it becomes more difficult, and it's more likely. It's a contributing factor to the
Yeah.
development of a homosexual tendency. I don't think there's any doubt that that is the truth.
Yeah.
There are a number of contributing factors, and that's I think, a much more solid way to think about homosexuality and same-sex attraction and the development of gay identity, whatever phrase you want to use for it. It's much more accurate to say that it's a set of contributing factors. It is not one thing. It is not a gay gene. It is not a hormone bath in utero. It isn't one. It isn't a thing.
Yeah.
It's a combination of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there's some truth to what you said. The other part of it, I think, is um, that by being unwilling to face up to the destruction of heterosexual marriage, man-woman marriage, the problems there, I think there is a kind of it's related to what we were talking about earlier. There's a kind of conspiracy, you could say, not explicit, but implicit conspiracy. I'll let you have your gay marriage if you won't criticize me for my divorces, if you won't
Hmm.
criticize me for this. I'll let you do what you want if you let me do what I want, and we'll have a little bond that our enemy is really those Christians who keep bringing this stuff up. They're our opponents. And um, I think there is something to that aspect of it. Like people don't want
Interesting.
to. They understand. Well, let me give you a different example, Steve. I don't know if you've ever done sidewalk counseling outside an abortion clinic.
Not
I don't
counseling,
know
no.
something.
Praying outside, but yeah, not.
Yeah, the people who do that regularly will tell you that it isn't unusual when they're out there praying or counseling or whatever they're doing for um, people who are obviously homosexual men to come by and flip them off, give them the
Mm,
finger, shout at them, curse at them, that kind of thing. And then you ask yourself, why would a gay man care about abortion? Like, this is the last person on planet Earth who is going to need abortion.
right.
But they do. They do. There's a very strong overlap between advocacy of one and advocacy of the other, of those two positions, right? Well, why? Because at the root, there's a common understanding of human sexuality that is behind both abortion and approval of gay marriage or gay relationships and stuff like that. It's a common understanding of what human sexuality is all about, what it means, and so on. Whereas on the other side, you know, the it's a unified view that we have as Catholics. That certain things are prohibited and certain things are encouraged, and our view is coherent, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. I Again, it was a presentation by a deacon something or other that I heard one time. Um, he referenced an article written by a gay man, and in the article, I think the title of the article was "We Are All Sodomites Now," and written by a gay guy. And what he was saying in the article was he was saying, listen, you heterosexual folks, married or unmarried, have sterile sex. You don't have babies. You just do it as a piece of your relationship, as a way to enjoy pleasure to get. Who are you to come and
yeah,
tell us that our version of exactly the same thing you're doing is wrong or illegal, or we're all, and that was the point of the title, is we're all sodomites now. We all have
right,
sterile sex. We have sex that has nothing to do with babies or reproduction or family building. We're all just in this for relationships and what we want and what makes us happy. So back off, and
right,
I,
right.
I thought
He's not wrong.
that is a real strong challenge to, yeah.
Right.
And uh, when it comes to the question you said when you founded the Ruth Institute, originally it was to kind of propose the love and economics model, or to kind of
Right.
repropose the love and economics model, to say
Right.
there's a real value in motherhood, there's an importance there, there's work there that is, you're irreplaceable doing that work.
Yeah.
Two-part question: has that message resonated with women, with young women, and what are some of the challenges that women who hear the message and think, that is right, I do have a desire for that,
Yeah.
but I just
Yeah.
don't see how I could do it. How does
Yeah,
that?
I see more and more people talking like that. There is a significant subset, just like the guys who are showing up at the traditional Latin mass.
Mm-hmm.
There's a set of women who want who want to get married, stay married, have kids, prioritize the kids and not the career. They're looking for, women with PhDs who are looking for part-time jobs, not tenure-track jobs. I see those people all the time, and it is gratifying to me. Sometimes I look at Love and Economics and I think this book was a complete failure. Because I was trying to talk to the economists, and they just didn't want to hear it. But then every once in a while I hear from somebody in her 30s who read it and who loved it and it was meaningful for her and stuff like that. And I not long ago, this past summer, I spoke at the Midwest Catholic Family Conference in Wichita, which
Mm,
is a very amazing family Catholic gathering. They've been doing it for 25 years and so on and so forth. And they asked me, I gave 3 talks at that thing, and one of them was on motherhood, was on the themes of love and economics, and
mm,
people loved that talk. I mean, they really, people of all ages really responded to it. So I think, the thing about the perennial teachings of the church is that they're perennial. They're evergreen. If I could make a play on your name, and it's why our videos at the Ruth Institute YouTube channel, it's why they continue to get views years after they were recorded. Because the themes are still true, and
right.
we're not chasing the news cycle. We might mention the news cycle as a hook to get people interested in it in the first place, but the meat of the thing is perennially true. And so and there are continually new people discovering, the truth that love really does make the world go round, and that without love, you can't have any kind of civilization without it. So
Yeah. Gosh.
yeah,
What, just as we were kind of running down towards the end of the clock here, still a million things I'd love to ask you, but maybe just kind of your diagnosis of where we're at right now and what you think is probably the most pressing work in front of us based on where we're at in relation to this whole sexual revolution, culture, et cetera. And maybe what are some signs of hope? You have a blessing in your apostolate that you interact with a lot of people
yeah.
who have been in this sexual revolution, anthropological revolution paradigm, and are looking for a way out, or maybe you've begun to see things. What are some of the signs of hope that you see in those interactions
Well,
too?
so I'm going to give you two signs of hope. First of all, the way the young people are conducting themselves after the murder of Charlie Kirk.
Mm,
It is astonishing to me. It is so encouraging to me that his young followers, the very night that he was murdered, they just organized prayer vigils.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
the next day, kids went to middle school wearing coats and ties out of respect for Charlie.
Mm, hmm.
The the young people are conducting themselves. They respect him, and they're conducting themselves with some dignity. Actually, a lot of grown-ups are acting like idiots, if I can just say that, and pointing fingers and yelling and being angry and all that. And the kids are like, we respect him, and they're trying to work out what to do, obviously, but seeing their spontaneous reaction, I just think is a very beautiful thing. The other thing that gives me hope is that we have done a big project at the Ruth Institute, and we're still doing it, of dealing with people, interacting with people who have left pride behind in some way or another,
Mm,
whether they were once gay, once lesbian, once transgender. Some people who have gone down a pretty elaborate path of medical reconstruction and whatnot. And looking at the way they have turned their lives around, the way they have been open to redemption, the way Jesus has moved into their lives and changed their lives in radical ways. These people and their witness, this is extremely powerful because, according to the world in the sexual revolution, they shouldn't even exist. There
right.
should not be a single person who is no longer gay, and of course, whenever we have an interview with somebody, someone will come on, a bunch of people will come on and say, well, you weren't really gay in the first place, or you really are still gay. Listen, he has a lisp. He's gay. And I'm like, what kind of business is this? You know what I mean? But the fact is, there are a lot of these people, and they give me hope, and I'm giving them a microphone, and I'm glad to do it. The most pressing issue, I think, is for every single person to be asking the Lord, what is the most pressing issue?
Mm,
Because I'm doing what I'm doing because I had a set of circumstances, gifts, and talents that equips me to do it. And so do you. I don't know who you are. Maybe 10 people will watch this. Maybe 10,000 will watch it. I don't know. But whoever you are, you too have a special set of gifts, talents, and circumstances. And you need to find out what that is that God wants you to do and that God is equipping you to do. And that He put you on this earth to do something no one but you can do. That's the thing.
that's great. That's great. Where can people find the Ruth Institute, the books, everything? Is that all one-stop shopping at Ruth Institute?
RuthInstitute.org will be your gateway to everything else. We have a weekly newsletter that we send out. Right on the home page, you can click and you'll get there to where you can sign up for the newsletter. And then also we have a very active YouTube channel. We have multiple videos per week going up there, and so you can always find something interesting there too.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Dr. Jennifer Roback-Morse, thank you so much for taking time out for this conversation. Appreciate it very much. It's been delightful. I think it'll be helpful to, well, like you said, whether 10 or 10,000 watch it, there's a lot of food for thought and prayer in it. So praise God for the good work you're doing. Keep it up.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Steve. It's an honor.
Excellent.